Okay, so fine. In this video, we're going to be looking at the IELTS speaking test. The IELTS speaking test happens to be the first test in your IELTS exam, and it is usually for 11 to 14 minutes. So within a maximum time of 14 minutes, you'll be done with your IELTS speaking test. The first thing you need to understand is what is the purpose of the IELTS speaking test. What is the examiner? What are they looking out for when you are taking your IELTS speaking test? Now, before that, I'd like you to take note that the IELTS speaking test is one-on-one. It's between you, the test taker, and the interview alone. It takes the form of an interview. So if you've attended any kind of interview before, then you don't have issue with the IELTS speaking test. Now, the purpose of the IELTS speaking test is to evaluate your ability to communicate fluently in standard English language, obviously verbally. So all your responses in the speaking test has to be spoken. You will speak it out, all right? So your ability to communicate without hesitations, without pauses, without too many self-corrections. Those are the things that are being looked out for in the IELTS speaking test. Now, under that, it means that you should make logic sense. When you are speaking in the IELTS speaking test, you are not just speaking for speaking's sake. You ensure that you are making sense. The things you are saying are things that anybody can relate with. That is taking note of what is happening currently, you know. And then the second thing you need to pay attention to in the speaking test is that you have to be real. Like you have to be realistic. You know, so avoid ambiguous statement. You know, for example, you ask somebody, for how long have you been reading? And then the person says something like, I've been reading since I was born. You know, that statement is a statement from a mind that is not connected to what the person is saying. Because obviously, you cannot start reading from where you were born. You need to get to a particular age in life before you can actually start reading. So that is an over-exaggeration. And when you give responses like that, the examiner feel that you are not connected to what you are saying. You are like absent-minded. So be real with your responses. And then be clear and audible. Be vocal. The examiner needs to hear you. You are not speaking to yourself. You are speaking to somebody. So you need to be clear and audible. And then your responses are expected to be spontaneous. That is the interesting aspect of the speaking test. It has to be spontaneous. So that actually affects the time frame from when you are asked a question and when you start speaking. So if you are asked a question and then you keep quiet maybe for 3 to 5 seconds before you start speaking, is actually affecting your flow in a way. You are expected to respond as quickly as possible. And then you need to take note of the tenses. Very, very important, the tenses. In fact, the tenses that are used in the question that have been asked will obviously affect your response. So if you are asked a question that have to do with something that happened in the past, you are going to give your response based on that. For example, discuss an event which you liked. You need to pay attention to this word, liked. It has to do with something that has happened in the past, okay? So pay attention to your tenses. Your responses should be spontaneous. You should be audible and clear. You should be real. And then you should make logic sense. All right, so this is the general purpose of the IELTS speaking test, or what the examiner expects from you. Now, we're going to look at the part of the speaking test, because the speaking test is actually divided into 3 parts. So we're going to look at those parts one at a time, and thereafter we look at the strategies for passing the IELTS speaking test. Speaking test is divided into 3 parts. So part 1 is actually called introduction and general questions. So from the name, you should already guess what it's going to be about. Introduction means you and the examiner will introduce yourselves to each other. The examiner actually begins the introduction by mentioning his or her name and reading something that is typed, general information about the exam. Thereafter, the examiner asks you about your name and look at your ID, which is your international passport for people in Nigeria, okay? So that is the introduction aspect. Now, immediately after the introduction, you begin the IELTS, that is, you begin the second one, which is the general questions. Here, the examiner will ask you about 3 questions. So in part 1, you should expect maximum just 3 questions actually, because at times it can go beyond 3 questions. All right, later in the training, I'll tell you how or what can lead to that. But generally in part 1, the examiner is meant to ask you 3 standard questions. And they are called general questions because it has to do with general happenings. They are not so much of intelligent question, like nobody is going to ask you to define anything. They are questions that have to do with you as a person, the things happening around you. So for example, under this section, the examiner can ask you questions about work. So the first thing you actually need to take note of in the speaking part 1 and all the sections is the topic. The examiner will always introduce the topic by using this kind of phrase. In this section, I'm going to be talking to you about work. All right? In this section, I'm going to be talking to you about your hometown. So once you hear something like that, that is the topic. In this section, I'm going to be asking you questions about work. Do you work or study? So it means that that section is centered on work. So already in your brain, you should be thinking about synonyms, things that can help you generally about work. All right, so the examiner asks you general questions, things you don't really need to think so much about. For example, do you work or study? Obviously, you know whether you are working or whether you are studying or you are doing nothing. So which is what you will now answer. Then if you say something, for example, I work, the examiner is going to ask you further questions about work. Like, tell me what a typical day in your office is like, you know, things like that. They are general questions. And then the examiner understands also that this is the beginning of the test. It's possible for you to be apprehensive, like not settled and relaxed. So the examiners are actually trained, you know, to try to make you say things that can make you relax, like try to crack jokes, like say something funny so that you can, you know, smile or laugh and then get relaxed. Because the truth is that you do better in the speaking test under a relaxed atmosphere because you are expected to speak naturally. Okay, so this is the IELTS speaking part 1. So it is a one-on-one or one-to-one kind of question sessions, like the examiner asks you the question and then you respond. The examiner asks you and then you respond. So let's look at the IELTS speaking. 2 is called long term. In this section, you are going to speak for 1 to 2 minutes alone without interruption in response to a question. Now, it looks like a typical presentation. If you've done presentation before, whether in school or anywhere, it's something like that you are going to be doing in this session. So the examiner will give you what is called task card or cue card. The task card or cue card contains the question. We're going to drop a sample of the question in this video comment section so you can look at it, all right? So go to the video comment section and look at the sample of question card, of what you see on the task card or cue card. And then we'll also put some other links to our website where you can get additional information. All right, so ensure you follow the link and the comment section of this video, and then you can actually ask questions through the comment section if you have any. Now, so the examiner at the beginning will give you the task card or cue card, then a pen and paper. This paper will be scratch paper, that is empty paper, and then you'll be given 60 seconds, which is 1 minute, to prepare your example of a task card or cue card. So you see something like that. Before the examiner hands it over to you, the examiner is going to read it out. So you hear something like, in this section, I'm going to ask you to describe a vocation you think is important to the society. You should say what it is, what it involves, what kind of people usually do this work, and explain why you think it is useful to the society. Now, after reading it out like that, the examiner hands it over to you. That is if you are doing the paper base. But there's also what is called VC. VC means video call. The question itself will be displayed on the screen. You will not be given a physical paper. Thereafter, the examiner gives you a pen, a paper, and then allow you 60 seconds to make notes. Remember that you are going to be speaking your answer. So you are not writing what to read. You are taking note or making notes that will help you when you are giving your response. So in sum, the speaking part 2, you are going to speak for 2 minutes alone without interruption. The examiner will not interject. And then you are going to be doing that on a given topic. But before you do that, you have 1 minute to prepare your response. Now, what are the things you should take note of when you are making notes for your speaking part 2? I'm just going to list them. Please take note of them. All right, so these are some of the things you should take note of while you are making notes for that 60 seconds. Always remember that it is 60 seconds. There won't be any extra time. So you must make good use of the 60 seconds. The first thing you need to take note of is look at the question itself and then take note of keywords. Like what we just read is talking about vocation. Vocation is there, society is there. Those are keywords. Now, while you're taking note of the keywords, you need to quickly write synonyms about them. That is words you can use to replace them. Because the examiner doesn't want you to keep repeating a particular word. You know, for example, vocation can be replaced with employment, job, work, you know, etc. So you think about such words and then you write them down. Then you also think about direct answers to the questions. So you look at those bulleted questions and think about the response you are going to give. The response you are focusing on, it's something that will help you while you are speaking. So you are not just thinking about what to say. You ensure that whatever you are going to give as a response, it's something that will give you the opportunity to speak for 2 minutes. Remember, you are speaking for 2 minutes. And then you should also think about illustrations and examples, you know, things you can remember about what happened in the past, you know, you can think about, and that can help you while you are speaking. You also take note of it. So these are some of the things that you should take note of in speaking part 2. You can take note of any other thing, but what you are doing generally is writing down points that will help you while you are speaking. And I like to mention this at this level. When you are doing your presentation and you need to get an information from your notes, don't focus on the note as if you are reading. You just peep. They call it peep. You just peep into the note and continue speaking because you are expected to speak and not to read. All right? So this is the speaking part 2. We are going now to the speaking part 3, which is the last section of the speaking test. The last section of the IELTS speaking test is actually the part 3. Remember, we said there are 3 parts. Part 1, introduction and general questions. Part 2, long turn. And this is part 3. Part 3 is called analytical discussion. So in this section, you are going to analyze and it's going to be a discussion between you and the examiner. So part 3 actually begins by the examiner asking you some questions about some of the things you said while you were speaking in part 2. That's usually the beginning of part 3. And that means some of the questions that will be asked in part 3, it's usually related to part 2 topic. But the important aspect of it is that the questions in part 3 are non-personal questions. Part 1 and 2 are personal. That is, your opinions speak for you. But in part 3, they are non-personal questions. What it means is that you are expected to give responses that doesn't necessarily have to do with your personal opinion, but your awareness of what is happening around you. All right, so you speak from that direction. And then it is an analytical discussion because you have to break it down. You are expected to break it down. Whatever question that you are asked, you know, to analyze means you need to look at that from different possible angles. So you are going to be analyzing. You try to break it down, whatever question that is being asked. And then you should expect confrontation. It is in this section that the examiner can actually challenge your response. So it doesn't mean, don't feel like you are not saying the right thing, or maybe, you know, what you are saying is wrong. Expect that the examiner can challenge your response. It's normal. And that is a real life thing, because no matter what your opinion or beliefs or the information you have is, somebody else has something else. Now, one of my students was asked a question about cartoons. She was asked, between children and adults, who watches cartoons the most. And then she said, obviously, children. And then in the course of the conversation, the examiner was practically challenging on confronting that her response. You know, that even adults too watch cartoons. It's fine, okay? It's fine. It's not an argument section. Just ensure that you maintain your ground and you're able to prove it beyond all reasonable doubt. And then ensure you give real life situations, real life example. If you want to quote statistics, use body that is responsible for such statistics, for such figures. For example, if I want to talk about health, information regarding to health, I should quote World Health Organization. If I want to quote information that has to do with maybe news or something I heard recently, I can quote something like BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera. These are big news organization, right? So whatever information you are giving, you should ensure that it's a real life information you are giving. All right. So this is the IELTS speaking test. The next series of videos you are going to be watching, you're going to have videos on speaking and strategies for passing part 1, strategies for passing part 2, strategies for passing part 3, and what is called band descriptors. Ensure you subscribe to this video so that you can be getting notification you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can be getting videos once we upload them. All right, thank you, and please take your study very seriously. We wish you all the best, and I'm optimistic that you will have a very high score in your IELTS speaking test and every other test. Thank you.
لأجاريهم قلدت ظاهر ما فيهم فبدوت شخصا آخر كي أتفاعل